Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, well, I won't even bother telling you what the date is today because we still don't know what date we're going to be playing this thing on, but I have put together another of our experimental vacation podcasts that will string together a theme once again. I've got a relatively current story that also happens to relate to something currently in the news. Well, lots of things currently in the news. You know the approach I've taken on FIFA corruption, the World Cup, and the weird coincidence, let's say, that the Trump-Russia investigation has revealed so much about who and which corrupt FIFA officials used to live in Trump Tower, the fact that FIFA seems to be rife with corruption, and that the two World Cups, the one that we're in the middle of now and the next one coming, happen to be one, of course, right now in Russia. And as you know, I don't know, weird things keep happening with Russia. And the next one is in Qatar. I still don't know about the pronunciation of that damn country, but that's the one I'm settling on. And that one's been kind of a puzzle. No one has really figured out exactly how it landed there, except that they've always hinted at the possibility of corruption having driven it there. And gee whiz, if Qatar is not in the news every day and in our podcast almost every day. So I thought I would add the two of these things together. And I also thought, I keep referencing old shows that we've done where we were looking into FIFA corruption and the investigation of it. And I finally decided what I ought to do is just pull out the audio of one of those old shows and graft it onto the other side, either before or after. And you'll find out which one I decided to do in just a second. So that we can put the two things side by side. A story about FIFA corruption now in 2018 and a look back at our first glimpse of it on this show in 2015. So I've borrowed from the episode of June 4th, 2015, and married it together with this current story on FIFA and World Cup and corruption, and sewed together a, I think, very interesting podcast for you. Hope you enjoy it. Let's get started with our first story then. A New York Times piece, June 7th, 2018, Ken Bensinger has, he's got this article. I don't know whether it's excerpted from his book, but, I'll not give away the title. I'll just give you the title. I guess I'll spill the title right now. How about this? Did Russia steal the World Cup? And the answer to did Russia steal anything is yes. But let's explain why. Long before anyone had ever heard of Christopher Steele or a P-tape, there was an investigation into FIFA corruption. You know that because you've been listening to the show for umpteen years. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you're relatively new to the show and don't know that we spent some time, going on about 3 years ago, just reading, actually, well before we became obsessed with Donald Trump. He was still just a distant joke at that point. But we got interested in the whole FIFA corruption story, which was just sort of fascinating from the perspective of total, soccer, football outsider. I was like, why would FIFA be corrupt? And it became obvious pretty quickly, A, that it was, and B, why it was. And ever since I've made, occasional mention of the fact that these corruption stories seem, oddly enough, to be connected. So it's topical and it's archival all in one. Ken Bensinger is listed here, just under his byline here, with the note that he is the author of the forthcoming book, Red Card, How the U.S. Blew the Whistle on the World's Biggest Sports Scandal. Sounds very interesting. I would read it, except I don't have the attention span to read books anymore. I'm trying. Maybe I just pick dumb books. I don't know. Maybe I'd read this. Send me a free copy. I don't know. Well, maybe I'll go get it. Anyway, let's read this. I know I can read this much. In the spring of 2010, Christopher Steele, a former British spy with a shock of graying hair and a quiet, understated manner, received some alarming news. Vladimir Putin, a lifelong ice hockey fan, had taken a sudden interest in soccer. That is interesting news, of course, not really immediately clear why it's interesting news, except to us it's interesting news because Christopher Steele. That's not by itself the only connection between these two stories. There are more. This was years before Mr. Steele compiled his now famous dossier on Donald Trump, with its references to clandestine meetings in Prague and, of course, the P-tape. In 2010, Mr. Steele, regarded among those who knew him as a serious and level-headed MI6 officer, had only recently retired and opened his private intelligence firm in London. He might have reasonably expected to be embarking on an uneventful, if lucrative, second career, but the story of what happened next would profoundly affect his and countless others' lives, foreshadowing the Trump investigation and the shadowy role Russia plays in the modern world. Among Mr. Steele's first clients was a group of wealthy individuals and corporations supporting England's bid to host the 2018 World Cup. The tournament hadn't been held in England since 1966, and the country's soccer-mad populace was desperate to do so again. England invented the modern-day game in the 19th century, and at the outset of the 21st, believed it was uniquely poised to host with dozens of world-class stadiums, hotels, highways, and airports ready. The British government chipped in £2.1 million of the bid's more than £17 million total cost, and international celebrities, including Prince William, David Beckham, and David Cameron, then the Prime Minister, promoted the effort. Mr. Steele had been hired in large part because of his expertise in Russia, one of 6 countries vying for the right to host the tournament. In the early 1990s, he had worked undercover in Moscow, and he maintained extensive contacts in Russian government and business circles. His mandate in the spring of 2010 was to find out anything he could about the competing bid. He was no stranger to Russia's playbook. When it came to pursuing national objectives, the country had few, if any, compunctions about employing whatever means, collusive, corrupting, scandalous, might be necessary. And on its face, it was clear the Russian bid was going to need a lot of help. Maybe this will solve some mysteries, lingering mysteries about why Russia became so involved in manipulating British politics as well as American politics. I wonder. I'm not really sure. In stark contrast to England, Russia appeared profoundly unqualified to host a month-long tournament expected to draw well over 3 million spectators. For starters, Russia didn't have a great soccer tradition. Its team hadn't even qualified to play in the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, thanks to an embarrassing loss to Slovenia. More important, it didn't have adequate stadiums or other infrastructure. And since it was already going to host the 2014 Winter Olympics, there were serious questions about how it could afford to build what was required. Another red flag there for me. No pun intended about red flags, but another red flag normally here. Why the lack of concern about raising the capital in Russia? And the answer is because we can steal it, I guess, and we're already sitting on tons of stolen money anyway, and better to launder it here in the country than outside, I guess. All right, good point here, though. The International Federation of Association Football. Yeah, no, I said I was sorry, but I read it out correctly. I didn't even realize that's FIFA, and I guess so. It's expressed in French probably. International Federation of Association Football. I thought it might be associations of football, but no. I see. What kind of football? Association football. I see what you mean. Anyway, FIFA, the Swiss-based nonprofit that runs the World Cup and oversees world soccer, ultimately rated Russia's bid riskiest for operational considerations among other contestants for the 2018 tournament. To most observers, Russia didn't seem like a serious threat to England's hopes. But Mr. Steele's confidential sources told a very different story. Mr. Putin, then serving a 4-year term as prime minister, saw hosting the World Cup as a vital way to project his country's power, and his own, around the world. He was determined, sources said, to win the bid at any cost. And how does Putin project power around the world, his own power? Money. Okay. Understood. Over the next few months, Mr. Steele collected a growing pile of intelligence suggesting that Russian government officials and oligarchs close to Mr. Putin had been enlisted to push the effort, cutting shadowy gas deals with other countries in exchange for votes, offering expensive gifts of art to FIFA voters, and even dispatching Roman Abramovich, the billionaire who owns the London-based Chelsea football club, to South Africa to pressure Sepp Blatter, FIFA's president. A spokesman for Mr. Abramovich told the Sunday Times that there was nothing untoward in his involvement in the Russian bid. The retired spy handed his findings to his clients supporting the English bid, who had been swaggering through the campaign with blithe optimism and self-confidence. But in July 2010, 5 months before FIFA would hold its vote on where to host the 2018 World Cup, Mr. Steele also passed the information on to another party he thought might be interested in learning what Russia was up to, an agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI didn't much care whether England got the tournament, of course, but the agent who supervised the FBI's Eurasian Organized Crime Squad had been looking for opportunities to chase down conspiracies emanating from Russia. After breaking the back of the Russian mob in New York, the squad had set its sights on border-crossing financial crimes involving oligarchs and mafia kingpins. Mr. Steele's intelligence about Russian attempts to corrupt FIFA seemed to check all the boxes. Thus began one of the largest and most ambitious investigations of international graft and money laundering in American history. One that would expose decades of deep-seated rot and corruption in global soccer. Over 5 years, a team of IRS and FBI agents, working under the direction of several ambitious young prosecutors, secretly dug into international soccer's darkest corners, flipping officials and mining millions of financial records to build a convincing case that the beautiful game had become little more than a source of vast profits for an international organized crime syndicate. The investigation finally broke into public view on May 27, 2015, with the sensational early morning arrests of 7 soccer officials in Zurich. The world's most popular game was shaken to its core. Multiple generations of FIFA administrators were brought down, accused of collectively taking hundreds of millions of dollars in bribes. In a matter of days, FIFA's once untouchable president, Mr. Blatter, announced that he would resign, and soon he was under criminal investigation as well. Mr. Blatter was not among those indicted, but he was ultimately banned from all soccer-related activities for 6 years. To date, more than 24 people and entities have been convicted of or pleaded guilty to racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering in the case, which continues. And we were puzzled by this when it first came out. I was, just sort of baffled as to how so much corruption could have insinuated itself. And it was fairly easy to understand, straightforward, once you begin to realize the business that surrounds soccer and the business that surrounds hosting an event like the World Cup. Millions of visitors are coming, hotel accommodations, shopping, concessions, construction of venues. I mean, so many things have to go on to get ready for and to host an event of this size. There are enormous profits to be made, certainly, especially by people who are in the contracting business or are operating on the margins of contracting businesses, or the idea, of course, of like concessions, which, would either these days either be all cash business, which is also a good way of laundering things, or these days, much more even of stuff you would buy off the street, like concessions, can be bought with credit cards. But I mean, I don't know what I would do if I were, for some reason, in Russia to watch the World Cup. The idea of using my credit card all over the place in Russia. It's just like, please steal my identity. I can't imagine that being a very smart thing to do, but great opportunity if you're, looking to skim money or steal it outright. And, if you've got total, a country full of shameless mafia thieves headed by a mafia thief who isn't going to prosecute you, you just have carte blanche to pull off any scam you want. And no reason really to limit yourself to stuff like credit card skimming, right? I mean, why not just do it in the contracting right up front? Very easy to see why it would be extraordinarily valuable to anyone, and particularly valuable to thieves and mobsters and money launderers. And so therefore, those are the places where you might reasonably expect to see larger amounts of money spent on winning the bid, including, right up to, well, let's just bribe everybody. And then as long as we're making or skimming more money off of the event than we're spending in bribes, then I don't see any reason not to do it. And of course, you just add another layer of complication in if you are talking about a corrupt government like that of Vladimir Putin, where you might say, we won't make a profit off of hosting these events, because it's the dicey proposition. Even if you do it on the up and up, it's a dicey proposition to make a profit. And maybe if you're basically setting up an event wherein dozens of mafia kingpins expect to make a killing, you might not net anything. You might lose money on this. But if you have a government that can pick up the tab, for one thing, hey, governments lose money on crap all the time. And why would Vladimir Putin be interested in hosting something that let's say he personally wouldn't make money on, at least in any obvious way? The answer is keep your oligarchs happy, keep your mafia kingpins happy, and P.S., after the accounting is all done, they'll kick it all back up to you anyway. So even if it's a money loser for Russia, or even a personal money loser for Vladimir Putin somehow, it's a way of keeping the people who keep you propped up happy, and they may, express some gratitude or be required to express some gratitude later in kicking profits from it back up to you anyway, so you never end up a loser, even if the country does. And if the country does, who cares? Screw them. I'm not the country. I'm just a person in it that's stealing money. I happen to be in charge of the government. You can see how it could be extraordinarily helpful to take on a project like this. And given that so many of those international sporting events do tend to lose money for the governmental entity that hosts it, ostensibly, you can see how more and more of these big events might end up in the hands of, if not outright criminals or outright corrupt countries, or at least by our standards, our understandings of what corruption is. They would certainly be well at home in autocratic countries where it was possible for one or a few forceful leaders to simply demand that the government foot much of the bill and that the profits be largely privatized. That wouldn't disturb an autocratic country, one, because they know where the benefits would go, and it's got political payback benefits of doing this. And two, no one can hold the autocrat accountable for a gigantic loss anyway. So, back to our story here. The Department of Justice managed to do something that few, if any, of the sport's billions of fans had ever believed possible. FIFA, nested high above Zurich, and its officials thought beyond any kind of regulation or government interference, had been held accountable. The investigation also forged a strong bond of trust between Mr. Steele, remember he's at the heart of this, and American law enforcement, one that led the former British spy in July of 2016 to hand the same FBI agent a secret dossier he had assembled alleging collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia to interfere in the American presidential elections, among other even more lurid claims. If you ever wondered then, what was it that moved Christopher Steele to contact the FBI with this. Remember, it's pretty simple to understand. When he was doing the soccer investigation, he struck up essentially an acquaintance with this American FBI agent who was interested in international organized crime and had some great success in handing the information over to him. And so then when he later on came to be in possession of equally disturbing information about Russia's interest in manipulating the outcomes of another very important event, though not a sporting event, very nearly the greatest parallel to a sporting event that we now have, thank you very much, American media, the United States elections, find out that the Russians want to manipulate that too? Where will I take that information? Clearly, the Americans need to be made aware of this. Who do I know? There is an FBI agent I know who I also previously gave very similar information to and got excellent results. The biggest money laundering case in American history cracked open by this FBI agent with my info. I also have information about what might be maybe the new biggest money laundering case in American history, or if not, a close second. Who should I give it to? How about the person I had such tremendous success with last time? I think that's a very natural conclusion. Continuing then with the article, by nearly every measure, the FIFA case had been a tremendous success. Why did I have to blather on about this? I should have just read the article. By nearly every measure, the FIFA case had been a tremendous success, showcasing brilliant, ambitious police work, while underscoring the international leadership role of American rule of law. What a great thing that is. And by the way, I guess in 2010, if you showed the corrupt Russians that American rule of law was the world's greatest tool against your style of corruption and profit, what might be your newest priority for destruction? If you could make a hit list of things that you as a Russian organized crime figure would like to get rid of most, I guess at this point, American international leadership and the role of American rule of law might be your targets. What an interesting thought. Investigators in half a dozen other countries, chastened by what the United States had done to the world's game, saw little choice but to open up their own FIFA investigations. But there is one glaring hole in what even the vanquished defense attorneys who had corrupt soccer officials as clients called a breathtakingly meticulous and exhaustive federal investigation and prosecution. What is that gaping hole? Any mention of Russia. How odd. Court records from the case run into the thousands of pages, and prosecutors spent weeks laying out every tangled intricacy of their digging in a 6-week criminal trial in federal court in Brooklyn late last year. But Russia, strangely, seems to have been completely absent from any of it. Mr. Putin's campaign to win the right to host the World Cup ultimately proved successful. You know, because they're holding it there right now. An attempt by FIFA itself to audit the bid after the fact was stymied when it was discovered that a football foundation linked to Mr. Abramovich, Mr. Putin's oligarch pal, destroyed the Russia bid team's computers. A FIFA report released last year cleared the bid team of any wrongdoing. Why would they have destroyed their computers? Did they bleach them? Did they do whatever else it was that weirdo Donald Trump accused Hillary Clinton of having done? I just wonder. You never know. Everything's projection. So, certainly could be the case, but I don't have the proof at my fingertips, so let's just continue. Following the successful World Cup bid campaign, Mr. Putin returned to Russia's presidency, remember he was the prime minister at one point, amid a growing wave of nationalistic sentiment and was subsequently reelected to a 4th term in March, do not congratulate please, with more than 75% of the vote, more than 75% share, I guess I could have said, just to save my mistaken paraphrasing. But yes, good point there, by the way. Don't want to gloss over the fact that he returned to the presidency amid a growing wave of nationalistic sentiment. That becomes important around the world all of a sudden. In the past few years, Russia has been accused of interfering in foreign elections, sponsoring cyber warfare, poisoning enemies with nerve agents, invading Ukraine, it's getting worse and worse, and abetting a murderous dictatorship in Syria. The country has somehow found a place at or near the center of nearly every geopolitical conspiracy, most of them considerably more insidious than where a quadrennial soccer tournament should be held. So why the interest, one might ask? On June 14th, the Russian national soccer team will square off against Saudi Arabia in Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium. I have no idea whether I'm pronouncing that correctly or not. By now, it being past June 14th, 1, you know the results, and 2, you might even have heard the proper pronunciation of the stadium. Okay, anyway, that would be the opening match of the 2018 World Cup. Lacking talent in midfield, a viable scoring threat, an organized defense, or a well-regarded coach, the Russian squad hasn't had any notable success since 2008 and qualified this time because host nations get an automatic spot. Tellingly, Russia's hopes rest on its captain, the cool-headed goalkeeper Igor Akinfeev. I have no idea where that emphasis goes. Akinfeev, I'm guessing, who presumably will be tasked with blocking an endless barrage of opponents' shots. Russia's is the second lowest ranked team in the tournament. At least you get that automatic bid. And in a recent poll, less than 20% of Russians said they believed it had a hope of advancing beyond the opening round. Not really their main interest, though, in pursuing the hosting job, I'm sure. Hundreds of millions of people around the world will tune in to watch that opening match, among them some of the same American law enforcement agents who built the FIFA case in the first place. 8 years since then, Russia is once again at the center of an American investigation of transnational corruption and collusion. This time, led by the special counsel, Robert Mueller, who was FBI director when the FIFA case was opened. Many of the soccer-loving viewers doubtless will wonder how it could be possible that Russia, of all places, could be hosting the World Cup, an event that remains relentlessly popular despite the disgrace befallen the institution that organizes it. Few, if any, will wonder whether Russia can actually take home the glittering trophy when the tournament ends on July 15th. The truth is that it doesn't really matter what happens on the field. Russia already won. Right, well, because what they're after, of course, was the ability to rake in big bucks from the event. Now, what sorts of big bucks are we really talking about? What kind of fun deals were available? Rather than go backwards into the archives, though I really feel like I want to do that at some point in the near future, to look up the old article that we referenced when we discussed these topics years ago. I just can tell you that off the top of my head, I recall that 2 of the most corrupt FIFA officials of the bunch just happened to live in Trump Tower. And I always found that kind of weird. One of the guys that I remember was named Chuck Blaze. Was that his name? I mean, he was just a real puzzle to me. I don't know what his background was, but anyway, it didn't even matter. This guy was like spectacularly corrupt, as it turns out. And he was convicted and tossed out of the organization. And he has since died. And I think we noted that in passing when he did die, on the show when we finally heard the news. But I mean, when I say he was living this fabulously corrupt lifestyle, I mean, he had a huge condo in Trump Tower, but he had 2 condos in Trump Tower. One, and this is the sort of thing that makes him sound like maybe he was living an excessively luxurious lifestyle. One of the 2 condos in Trump Tower was just for his cats. I don't know if I mentioned that recently or not, but that was the case, and that's the sort of bizarro, New York rich person thing that he was into that I thought, that's a red flag all by itself. And there was another very curious story about Chuck Blaze, and I mean, maybe I can take a pause here for a second and go dig it up, because it was kind of wild. Hang on, I have the luxury of just pausing for a second to grab this story, so why don't I take it? Okay, so I found at least one article, and I know there's more out there, but I found the one I found really quickly that explains a little bit more than the basics about what made Chuck Blazer's presence in Trump Tower so strange. There's this bizarro story. You might think, oh, well, the fact that he has an apartment in Trump Tower, that might not mean anything in particular. Like, it was a famous place, and if you had a bunch of money to waste, you might buy a condo there in Trump Tower. That doesn't mean he knows Donald Trump or has anything to do with Donald Trump. I'm sure Donald Trump, thinks he's the king of the castle there and moves in and out at a private elevator and doesn't have anything to do with the residents. But apparently that's not true. And it's also not true in Chuck Blazer's case. So here's one I grabbed that I think gives us some interesting information. This was in the blog section of the old HuffPost, but a post back in, June, 2 years ago, June 1st, 2016, though it was updated in June of 2017, probably with Chuck Blazer's death. But Mary Papenfuss is the name of the blogger here, and I guess, she also did a book on Trump and found this particular side story interesting and entertaining. Long ago and not so far away, it begins, two Queens boys met at the top of Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue in Midtown Manhattan and spotted a kindred spirit. They were both supercharged New Yorkers on the make and would strive mightily to become something few would ever imagine they could be. One would become an even bigger millionaire than he was that day, a reality TV star and a face of a, quote, university. And that's where this story becomes really interesting. Trump University is involved in this. How so? You'll see. Most surprisingly, Donald Trump would eventually launch a run for president, surging into the Republican National Convention in an electoral tsunami that would leave many Americans dumbfounded. The other would reach the very pinnacle of a global soccer empire, becoming a multimillionaire on the way before crashing and burning as a tax-dodging snitch. Chuck Blazer would help bring down some of the biggest crooks in sports history at FIFA. And here it is written out in French. The Fédération, how do they say Fédération? Fédération, how do they say it? I don't know. Got no idea about French. Internationale de Football Association. Forget about it, man. I don't know. It's FIFA. Anyway, Chuck Blazer would help bring down some of the biggest crooks in sports history at FIFA under the tutelage of his FBI handlers and investigators working for U.S. Attorney Loretta Lynch. They were bugging Trump Tower, were they? Well, that's because it was full of criminals. I have to add that. I mean, she didn't note that, but that's probably something she knows as well as I do. Trump's high-rise represented the pinnacle of the American dream, and Trump was the king of the hill to Chuck Blazer. Terry Thompson and I discovered researching our book on the soccer snitch, American Huckster. Oh, I saw the title of the book and I figured that was about Trump, but it was about Chuck Blazer. How interesting. Blazer had doggedly climbed the demographic ladder of his home borough of Westchester, to finally land what he considered an icon of success. Chuck boasted to friends that his Russian grandfather made his living washing windows in Midtown high-rises. Now his grandson lived in what he considered the very best of them, because he was a scumbag, and that's what scumbags think about Trump Tower. Donald Trump enjoyed an easy familiarity with Blazer, though they didn't shake hands when they met. Trump's germophobia was in full bloom as he made it his job to avoid touching people in the early 90s when Blazer moved into his Trump Tower apartment. Chuck took over a home at the top, formerly occupied by Michael Jackson interestingly enough, who, bizarrely, left countless yellow Post-it notes all over the walls. That place is a effing mystery, I gotta tell you. Trump was also at the top of his tower in his penthouse, made to look like Versailles, if Versailles existed in Las Vegas. In 2005, Trump asked Blazer for some help with his latest enterprise. He wanted to use his neighbor's new apartment in Trump Tower, this one on the 49th floor, to film an infomercial for Trump University, and offered to pay $5,000 for the day's rent. Now, as we know, she reports here, the business wasn't truly a university. It offered no degrees and never obtained a state license to function as an educational institution. Instead, it involved a pricey $1,500 3-day seminar and a $35,000 gold elite package pitching success. Of course, we hate elites, so that seems pretty odd. But I'm puzzled here, and I don't know. We'll read on to see if there's any explanation. Why use Chuck Blazer's apartment when, of course, Donald Trump's own apartment is the most gorgeous, most beautiful, and most iconic representation of success there could possibly be? Why ask to use Chuck Blazer's apartment? And if you've ever seen Chuck Blazer, I don't know what his apartment looked like. I guess I would if I looked at the video. And I have seen part of the video, and apparently, this is the other thing, it didn't look like the set that they used. That's the bizarre thing. Like, if he had some extensive library, a gorgeous mahogany library with, leather-bound volumes that looked like a university or whatever, a dumb person's idea of what does a university look like? Well, it has books, so I'll film here. And there were indeed books in the background, but apparently they were brought in for the set. So, you could have done that anywhere. I'd really love to know what the hell the thinking was. And maybe it's in this article, and I should just shut up and read. This is usually the answer to most of my questions. Be quiet. Just go read now. Once Blazer agreed to let Trump use his place, the film crew set about transforming a room in Chuck's apartment into an ersatz library, hauling in dark wooden bookshelves, desk chairs, and a huge green globe for the commercial, which was supposed to look like a kind of masterpiece theater interview. One problem with filming that day: there were no books. Blazer wasn't a reader. The crew scrambled to find reading material, and law books materialized from somewhere. And I don't know, maybe did they go and get that? Michael Cohen wouldn't have had them. Does Stewie Rara have books like that? I don't know. Well, that's what they got. Trump avoided shaking hands with anyone. And when Blazer's girlfriend, Mary Lynn Blanks, ordered deli food for the crew, he insisted that it be removed because he didn't like the smell, she recalled. At Trump University, and of course this is in his voice, at Trump University, we teach success, Trump would declare in the commercial that calls him, without question, the world's most famous businessman, although he doesn't actually do it in his voice. That's a voiceover announcer. But whatever. I'm sure he would have had no problem reading it himself. That's what and this isn't his voice, that's what it's all about. Success. It's going to happen to you. He vows that the best of the best professors, handpicked by me, and that's what got him in so much trouble at the trial, right, will teach you better than the business schools. The Donald's main contribution to Blazer's education, incidentally, was to introduce him to Trump's beauty pageants. Another fun connection. Trump's beauty pageants, where the 450-pound Lothario, and we are talking about Chuck Blazer, not Donald Trump, though that's a good guess, perhaps, at his weight as well. Where the 450-pound Lothario, oh my God, he's the 400-pound guy on a bed. I never thought of that. Wow. Where the 450-pound Lothario became a regular because all the girls loved Chuck Blazer, because beauty, look, is only skin deep, and these girls could see his soul, which was corrupt, but it was corrupt with a lot of money. That's the point. One of his pageant companions was Italo Zanzi, a director of marketing for the Gold Cup tournaments that were a source of millions of dollars in bribes for Blazer. Zanzi, who now heads Italy's Roma football club, once boasted that he focused, after the pageants, on the losers. Ironically, a word that would become a kind of attack mantra in the Trump campaign. Why the losers of the pageant? Because they were more, quote, grateful for attention. And suddenly we take a weird and dark turn into pickup artistry and men's rights activists and incels, et cetera, et cetera. Oh my God, it's horrific. But and negging, yeah. All right, great. By 2010, Trump University changed its name to the Trump Entrepreneur Initiative to dodge the educational license requirement. It would cease to function shortly after and would become the target of 2 class action lawsuits. In 2013, then New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman also filed a $40 million lawsuit against Trump and Trump University, alleging that the enterprise had defrauded more than 5,000 people. The teachers weren't picked by Trump, and a few had any experience in real estate, which was the core of the curriculum, noted the suit. Trump has denied all accusations, and he as an attorney and his attorneys have struggled to keep the cases out of court until after the general election. We all know how that finally turned out. But federal judge Gonzalo Curiel, and we know how that turned out, agreed last week, and again, this is an old article, last week with the Washington Post argument that Trump's run for president makes his business dealings a matter of public interest, and ordered Trump University documents in the case unsealed. Trump branded the judge a hater, trying to railroad him because of the candidate's vehement positions against Mexican immigrants. Chuck Blazer is no longer at the top of his game in Trump Tower. He is gravely ill, and he has, of course, since died, and in hospice care, reportedly unable to speak. He's paid millions of dollars in penalties and is awaiting sentencing as part of a plea deal with the feds concerning tax dodging, money laundering, and taking bribes in the FIFA scandal. Donald Trump, at the time of the writing of this article, is roaring to the Republican National Convention. The press is now poring over the released Trump University documents, including depositions from clients and managers who blast the operation as a scam. One document, an internal business playbook for instructing employees, encourages workers to urge customers to max out their credit cards to pay for classes. We teach the technique of using OPM, other people's money. Note the guidelines. That's something Chuck Blazer would understand, except he's dead. And Donald Trump became president of the United States. And what else do you really need to know? Okay. I just found that really interesting. And there was more interesting information in there, but what I was really searching for from that piece was confirmation of the story, the very weird and still unexplained story of how and why Donald Trump came to use Chuck Blazer's apartment to film the infomercial for the now infamous Trump University. What a strange decision. I'll poke around. I wonder if I'll be able to find anything that would ever explain that. And man, I'd love to know what motivated that. Anyway, there's more that I can bring you. And I just wanted to bring that one to you because it was so strange and it made it FIFA relevant for you again. And the tournament now in progress. I think that's rather interesting. Now, off to the races with a new article, or a relatively recent article. This is a June 21st entry from Hanna Levintova. I'm guessing at the pronunciation of that name. But we're back to Russia by way of Mother Jones magazine. This time reading a piece entitled Trump's Miss Universe Business Partner. Back to the pageants. What about the soccer? Well, Trump's Miss Universe business partner built 2 World Cup stadiums. Now he's part of the Russia probe. And let me tell you, before we get on with the rest of the story, he's not part of the Russia probe because he built 2 World Cup stadiums. Though that might by itself it could conceivably land you in the Russia probe. Could land you in the FIFA probe if they're still doing any probing of it. But it didn't matter because this guy was already in the, slated for a spot in the lineup. He's in the rogues gallery. Who built these two stadiums being used for the World Cup games. And there are plenty, of course. Two of them were built by Aris Agalarov. That's the Trump Miss Universe business partner we're talking about. Not somebody new. There are probably plenty of partners out there, but Agalarov, we know all about him. Why the question about the construction of the two World Cup stadiums, or what questions arise from his construction? He is, after all, in the construction business, right? Well, Aris Agalarov used unpaid migrant labor on the $600 million projects, which were, of course, bestowed by Putin. That's the subheader on this piece. Let's take a look. By the summer of 2016, the workers were fed up. For half a year, they'd been pushing to complete a 3-tiered, 35,000-seat stadium on a swampy island outside, where? Kaliningrad. Do you remember our discussing Kaliningrad not that long ago? And how interesting a place it was, and historically and symbolically, and that it was this outpost. And then we even made mention of the fact that Kaliningrad had intentionally been included as a hosting site for at least some of the opening round games. Well, the Kaliningrad Stadium, at least that one, who knows, maybe a second. I don't know how many of them they built there, but he's built 2 stadiums. We don't know where the other one is yet. Aris Agalarov in Kaliningrad. It all comes together. Okay. 35,000-seat stadium on a swampy island outside Kaliningrad in time for, of course, Russia's 2018 World Cup. But it had been months, the workers said, that's who we were talking about, since they'd been regularly paid, receiving only a small portion of their wages or being offered paltry breakfasts instead. It's a good way to make money, I guess, if you can get away with it. Many foreign workers left, thinking they'd never recoup the wages they were owed by the subcontractor who hired them, or from the man ultimately in charge, a Russian oligarch who had been a business partner of Donald Trump and who would soon play a role in the Trump-Russia scandal. And I suppose I can understand that. If you are a worker that gets stiffed in working on a World Cup stadium, and the guy who stiffs you is a great friend of Putin's, and they're both basically in the business, if you will, of constructing these stadiums in order to skim off as much money for themselves as possible, there's very little hope of being able to use certainly any of the Russian legal system to leverage your back pay out of Agalarov. And not that there would ever be any reason to think that you could leverage the money out of them by using the American legal system. But I suppose if the American legal system had busted FIFA corruption wide open, I don't know. I mean, there's really no reason to believe that the United States would have been able to take care of this problem. But if you were to, I don't know, defect as a, or take off as a refugee, thinking, I asked for my back pay and they threatened to kill me, so I'm going to show up and ask for asylum in the United States, right? Now there's with Donald Trump there's no chance you're going to get in as a refugee. Although who knows, maybe they let Russians in. But 2, you're certainly not going to be able to convince him, can you help me out? I need to file an international case against Aris Agalarov for back pay. Yeah, really? Why? I mean, the answer is no, but I'm just curious. Like, what do you think you were going to get paid? Oh, I was working on a construction job and he stiffed me. Oh, I'm not going to help you with that. I stiff people all the time. Hell, you're lucky I didn't tell you I was a lawyer and have you pay me up front to file the case and then walk away from it. All right. Back to the actual real story instead of the made-up things about it. After prosecutors sued the subcontractor, I guess they have to go through the motions, a local firm called, what is this? Ruspetstroy, I'm going to guess. And you can sue them. You just can't sue the general contractor. Aris Agalarov isn't going to stand for it. So after prosecutors sued the subcontractor, a court ordered the company to immediately start paying back wages. Within weeks, Ruspetstroy's general director, he stopped responding to workers' phone calls. Then he stopped coming to the office. Soon, his car was found abandoned at a local airport. Text messages went out to workers, "You've been fired." They learned that from Donald Trump. With their boss nowhere to be found, More than 100 complained they were each owed wages amounting to about what an average Russian makes in a month. The battle over pay in Kaliningrad is just one example of abuses workers say they endured at 2 World Cup stadiums built by construction magnate and oligarch Aras Agalarov. Agalarov has become known in the United States as a key player in the Trump-Russia scandal. He and his pop singer son, Emin, orchestrated the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting between top Trump campaign officials and a Russian emissary whom the Trump advisors believed was bringing them Kremlin dirt on Hillary Clinton. 3 years earlier, the Agalarovs partnered with Trump to bring the Miss Universe contest to Moscow, and afterward, the Trump and Agalarov families collaborated on a Trump Tower project in Moscow before the venture fizzled out. Through Trump's 3 decades of trying to do business in Russia, Aras Agalarov, who was once dubbed Putin's builder, became his closest business associate there, one of the few to help Trump make money in that country. Now, contacts between the 2 clans, including the Trump Tower meeting, are being scrutinized by U.S. investigators. In recent years, Moscow has relied on Agalarov to build big projects for the government, including a highway and a college campus. In 2014, in a move reflecting his close ties to Putin's regime, Agalarov's company, the Crocus Group, won 2 no-bid government contracts to build World Cup stadiums in Kaliningrad, a Russian outpost bordering Poland, and in Rostov-on-Don, a city of just over 1 million residents in the country's southwest. At each site, Agalarov's projects were marked by accusations of labor abuses, including improper contracts, subpar living conditions, retaliation against complaining migrant workers, and almost 30 million rubles, about $470,000, in unpaid or delayed wages. One worker in Rostov was crushed to death by a metal plate. How fun. In other cities, I didn't encounter such a large quantity of violations. There were some, but not like this, says Semyon Simonov, a Russian labor rights attorney, that's an endangered species, who, ironically, after all their years of communism, but whatever, who visited Kaliningrad and Rostov, among 5 other World Cup sites, to research working conditions for Human Rights Watch. They turned out to be on the cutting edge. They were in first place. Great, world class in terms of cheating workers. I love it. While the government had originally estimated each stadium would cost about 15.3 billion rubles, after urging from Agalarov, they allocated significantly more, 18.7 billion rubles, or $296 million for the Rostov arena, and 17.3 billion, more or less $275 million for Kaliningrad, making them among the most expensive Russian World Cup stadiums. Now, again, as we were discussing before, why do that? Why take on these enormous expenses? And the answer is, this is what you can use the Russian government and state-owned enterprises to funnel enormous amounts of money to your friends, who in turn use the money, 1, to kick back to you, and 2, to keep you in power in the hopes that they'll get future contracts just like it and do the same thing again. Right? Let's continue. In early February 2016, a confident Agalarov went on a state-owned sports channel, to announce that both construction projects were ahead of schedule. He boasted that the Kaliningrad venue will be built in record time. That sounds familiar. I did some searching on the internet, and a stadium of this size has never been completed in 2 years, he said. The next month, Agalarov was joined by the region's governor at the Rostov site, where he announced that that stadium was also ahead of schedule and on budget, except, of course, they inflated the budget. But anyway, inspectors from Building and Woodworkers International, a Switzerland-based union federation, found that at each location, Crocus had built temporary, hostel-style housing for laborers flowing to its construction sites, many of whom were migrants from former Soviet republics in Central Asia, including Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. squeezing 8 workers into rooms measuring just 18 square yards. While Agalarov boasted about coming in on budget, the workers were clamoring to be paid. In May, workers in Kaliningrad lodged complaints with local prosecutors, and in Rostov-on-Don, about 700 people left their posts to strike in front of the stadium site, holding signs demanding payment from Crocus. Good luck with that. Veronika Selina, a spokesperson for Rostov's Regional Ministry of Construction, confirmed to RBC, a Russian newspaper, that workers employed by the subcontractor haven't been receiving their wages. Well, now you know how they came in on budget. Even though that budget was inflated. So that's a very interesting thing. Need you to increase the budget, but we'll at least come in on budget, but nobody got paid. So what happened to the money? I already told you. Laborers there told Human Rights Watch that contractors promised wages of 33,000 to 40,000 rubles a month, roughly $600 to $700, but that they were pressured to sign employment documents committing to less than half that amount. How odd. A Ukrainian migrant named Alexander, who started at Rostov in January of 2016, told a reporter from his home country that his money was delayed almost from the outset. In fact, they were paid twice as little, he complained. It's an odd way of putting it, but they don't speak English, so okay. We were treated like cattle, he added. I worked hard without money, and my family waited months for my money transfers. After deciding he would never get the payments he thought he was owed, Alexander returned home in July of 2016. In April 2017, about 200 mainly Central Asian migrant workers in Rostov went on strike, demanding 25 million rubles, $392,000 or so, in unpaid wages, returning to the job only after Crocus promised payment. The company did not respond to Mother Jones's request for comment. Why would they? Declining to answer questions about whether these wages were paid. Many of these workers are poor migrants. If you want to cut corners to cut your costs, especially if the contractor is under a lot of pressure, this is the easiest place to do it, says Rachel Denber, Deputy Director of the Europe and Central Asia Division at Human Rights Watch. Especially as the deadline draws near, making sure that workers get paid seems to be the last priority. In March 2017, after workers complained about 5 months' worth of unpaid wages, about 30 migrants from Central Asia in Rostov who'd spoken up were abruptly deported. What an interesting tool. The authorities just came into the cafeteria one day and took all of them, said Simonov. In July of 2016, Simonov paid a visit to, what was it again? Oh yeah, right. Ruspetstroy office in Kaliningrad to ask about applying for a job himself. The guards outside told him not to bother. The director was gone, they said, and there had been many complaints about unpaid wages. That month, prosecutors turned up the heat, lodging a criminal case against the absent director and accusing him of stiffing several dozen workers of 901,000 rubles. It's about $14,000. He was finally arrested a year later in Krasnodar, probably mangled that town name, more than 1,000 miles away. It's unclear if the wages he owes has ever been paid. Attempts to reach Ruspetstroy were unsuccessful. Corporate filings indicate that the company was liquidated this March. Agalarov, for his part, took minimal responsibility for the subcontractor's actions. Crocus Group offered to pay 1 month of back wages to 45 Kaliningrad workers who hadn't yet walked off the job at a paltry rate of 59 rubles, that's about $1 an hour, or 13,000 rubles, $206 a month. The rest of the owed money, the company said, would have to come from their subcontractor's absent director. This is pennies compared to the work done, one worker told news outlet Rosbolt. I didn't know what to do. Yeah, and nothing will be done either, and those games are being played despite it all, and of course people sitting in the stadium would have no way really of knowing that they were sitting in a stadium that was built with unpaid labor, which some people call slave labor, but I guess since they got $1 an hour eventually, can't quite do it. I don't want to overstate the case. Due to loopholes in Russian law, Really? Loopholes in Russian law? Simonov says it would be very difficult for a court to find Crocus liable for any wages owed by subcontractors that it paid. It's a persistent scheme to transfer blame, Simonov says. The general contractor can effectively say, we fulfilled our obligations. We transferred you the money. The rest isn't our problem. Of course, that is unless the guy who absconds with all the money happens to kick it back up to the big boss in a bid to not be tracked down and murdered. One wonders. But, hey, the evidence for that just isn't here. What can you do? We don't know what happened to that guy who's now extraordinarily rich, maybe, or dead, or just missing. Kaliningrad's stadium contract was first awarded in 2012 to a Russian developer named Mostovik after an open bid process. Seems fair, right? Oh, there's more. When Mostovik, though, went bankrupt in 2014, just a month after the Sochi Olympic Games, which were themselves riddled with allegations of worker exploitation, corporate corruption, contractor overspending, and government kickbacks, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, rather than reopen the bidding, signed a March 2014 order designating Crocus as the sole executor of the stadium, along with the arena in Rostov-on-Don. The pick was hardly a surprise. Novaya Gazeta, Russia's most prominent independent newspaper, had reported for months that Agalarov would likely get the lucrative contract despite having no history building sports facilities. An unnamed Putin aide told the paper in February 2014, that Agalarov would be chosen over aluminum magnate, we love that, Oleg Deripaska, and billionaire businessman, Ziavudin Magomedov. Magomedov is my best guess on the last name there. Haven't heard his name, but of course we all know Oleg Deripaska, each of whose companies had extensive experience with arena construction. Magomedov had lobbied hard for such contracts, but in the end won only a 850 million ruble deal to prepare the swampland on Kaliningrad's the name of the island, Oktyabrysky Island for Crocus's construction. So he got a piece of it. It's about $13.5 million. Agalarov, by the way, later accused Magomedov of bungling the job, leading to Magomedov's imprisonment pending a criminal trial. Look out. For years, the Crocus Group worked primarily in commercial real estate, becoming known for their chain of glitzy Vegas mega malls in Moscow's suburbs. But in 2009, the Putin administration decided to take a risk on Crocus for a tough and important infrastructure project, transforming a desolate Pacific island near Vladivostok into a $1.2 billion campus for Far East Federal University. I wonder if that's a real university. He hoped the gleaming grounds would attract Chinese investment after playing host to APEC's 2012 Pacific Rim Summit. Agalarov delivered, erecting more than 70 buildings in a forest where before there had barely been roads at all in time for the diplomatic gathering. A year later, Putin bestowed on Agalarov the Order of Honor, a state award and a medal, for his role in the project. Agalarov, Putin said, had demonstrated high performance and social responsibility standards. I wish to thank you so much for your work and contribution to the development of this country. After that, lucrative Kremlin projects started rolling in. In 2013, Crocus got a federal contract to construct sections of the Central Ring Road, a new highway encircling Moscow. In November of that year, the company partnered with Trump to bring Miss Universe to Russia, having assured Trump that Agalarov's Kremlin connections could smooth bureaucratic obstacles to staging the event. 4 months after Trump and Agalarov's relationship was cemented by the pageant, Putin tapped Crocus to build the 2 World Cup stadiums. At one point, Agalarov said he considered turning the work down, given the short time frame and the headaches involved in building on swampland. I thought about it, but I could not say no, Agalarov told Forbes. Plus, he told Kommersant, another publication there in Russia, not Forbes, it is always nice when the government invites you, without competition, to build a project. It is nice. These World Cup stadiums, they are distributed to the real insiders, says Anders Aslund, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, I believe we've heard his name before, and an expert on Russian corruption. Ilya Shumanov, deputy director of Transparency International, echoes the point, adding that big sports contracts are a key form of leverage between Putin and Russia's wealthiest. Building them may be difficult, but Shumanov says the projects deliver the Kremlin support that ensures oligarchs and other tycoons can keep doing business. Those who get the contracts are the cronies of Vladimir Putin, or cronies of his inner circle, and this is a form of compensation, he says. They show their loyalty, and thus they get the contracts. As construction began in December of 2015, Agalarov again demonstrated his allegiance to Putin's regime by penning an op-ed defending the family of Yuri Chaika. We have heard that guy's name before. Russia's prosecutor general and a loyal associate of the president. We heard his name when we were talking about the Trump Tower meetings. That Natalia Veselnitskaya was said to be a close associate of his. And look, she appears a little bit further down in the story. Again, just be patient. Chaika's two sons, Artem and Igor, had recently been targeted by Alexei Navalny, the Russian anti-corruption activist, who allegedly who had alleged that they had gotten rich through shady deals and their father's connections. In reference to the Chaika expose, Agalarov went so far as to quote Joseph Goebbels, "A lie repeated 1,000 times becomes true." And then they probably went on to execute it as well. Months later, Yuri Chaika became involved with Agalarov ahead of the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting. The Russian emissary who met with Trump's advisors was lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya, a close friend of Chaika. And in the email between Rob Goldstone, an Agalarov associate, and Donald Trump Jr. that led to the meeting, Goldstone explained that he was reaching out following a meeting between Chaika and R.S. Agalarov with obviously very high-level and sensitive information that was part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. Don't forget about that part. At the meeting, Veselnitskaya relied on a memo as she advocated easing U.S. sanctions on Russia that was similar to a document drafted by Chaika's office 2 months prior. Agalarov's outreach to Putin and his regime has paid off, says Iceland. Agalarov has advanced to being under the Kremlin Krisha, he says, using Russian slang that literally means roof, but refers to political protection. And Agalarov's links to America's new president helped cement his favorable reputation with the Kremlin. In July of 2017, 2 days after Agalarov's role in the Trump Tower meeting was revealed by the U.S. press, his company was approved for a flashy new construction project outside Moscow. With 6 games yet to come at the Agalarov-built venues, Brazil, Croatia, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, and Uruguay have already delighted World Cup crowds at the arenas. Still, many workers who helped build them have not been paid. The Kaliningrad Stadium went 550 million rubles over budget. It's $8.5 million. Remember how he was coming in on budget? And he even busted the budget. He upped the budget, he broke the budget, and he didn't pay anybody. That must be worth a great deal of money to him. Anyway, the Kaliningrad Stadium went 550 million rubles over budget, and Agalarov has said he won't make a profit on the projects. Oh, so sad. Even so, he may see them as a gamble that was worth taking. The World Cup contracts were the apex of almost a decade of Agalarov courting the Kremlin, while also forging a connection with Trump as he was emerging as an influential American political figure. Agalarov, Iceland says, has come up on the back of Trump. I don't know whether that's really so or not. Those connections that he made with Trump, direct or indirect, they could have buttressed all of this, adds Shumanov. For the Kremlin, it's important to cultivate those connections, to help the success of his business, so if there's a need, he can facilitate contact. I don't even know if I really buy all of that, nor, of course, do I buy the idea that he didn't make any money on the contracts. That was the whole point. There's just nothing on the books that says that he made any money on it, so therefore he can't be taxed on it even by the Russian authorities. Very interesting. And once again, tying together a rather remarkable number of threads just by coincidence, of course. Not, saying there's anything to it. Just saying coincidence is an interesting thing. By the way, just out of curiosity, I never did go back, I don't think, and look up how does a guy who is 450 pounds, as Chuck Blazer is, get involved in like international and professional soccer? And I was just sort of curious, like, was he once a great soccer player? This sometimes happens, right? Once a great soccer player, and okay, not playing anymore, not staying fit, whatever, you ballooned to 450 pounds. I don't know. It happens, right? But was that it? Was he once a soccer player? And I had this inkling that maybe the answer was no, because, he's American, and I don't really follow soccer. But, I mean, if you were looking for, like, the great names in American soccer, I mean, a Chuck Blazer kind of name would stand out, right? So so I looked it up in Wikipedia. I'm just curious. So, no is the answer. Here's how it happened. And, I mean, this is how I guess a lot of these things can happen. And in the United States, where we didn't really have a great soccer tradition, I guess if you get in on the ground floor, right, you can make things happen. Blazer, it says, grew up in a middle-class Jewish family in the New York borough of Queens, where his father ran a stationery and newspaper shop. He attended Forest Hills High School and then took an accountancy degree at New York University. After graduating, he enrolled in NYU's Stern School of Business, but did not complete his MBA. Now, moving along. He spent a number of years selling promotional and marketing items. His first success was supplying buttons for the smiley face craze in the 1970s, right? Interesting. Didn't move on to like, what else might have happened there? Chia heads or Pet Rock or whatever. No, this is how he got involved in soccer. His son started playing youth soccer in Westchester County, New York in 1976. Okay. Interesting enough. Blazer started coaching the team even though he had never played the game. And in 1976, I'm sure you could get away with that. We just need somebody to run the team. And lo and behold, he turned out to have a better talent for running the team in the league than for actually coaching. He is remembered, it says, as a skillful and active administrator, more interested in organizing than coaching, and that stands to reason. He advanced in youth soccer administration up to, ready, the vaunted heights of the Eastern New York State Soccer Association. Well, good for you. In 1984, persuading Pele to campaign for him, he was elected to the United States Soccer Federation as executive vice president in charge of international competition. That, I guess, is the leap that we don't really understand, but okay. In the next 2 years, the U.S. men's soccer team played 19 matches, having played only 2 in the 2 years before Blazer's election. So, yeah, a capable administrator at that. Okay. While with U.S. Soccer, Blazer played a central role in the decision to make the successful bid for the 1994 World Cup. He really is making some rapid rise. Also during this time, the U.S. women's soccer team was formed. And, they're pretty good. Blazer's position gave him a seat on the board of CONCACAF, as my best guess at how they pronounce CONCACAF. That's the regional North American soccer federation that participates in FIFA. And that is where he met Jack Warner, who is, by the way, the other corrupt FIFA official who likewise lived in Trump Tower and also in close proximity to Trump himself. I think I read, and I'll see if I can grab it, at least one article that said that Warner lived across the hall from Trump. And as we know, we've seen those goofy pictures of the gilded entryway into Trump's own Trump Tower unit, where he took so many pictures with visitors like Nigel Farage, etc. Imagine, the poor sap who has to live across the hall from all of that. Anyway, I'm sure they loved it because they loved the glitz and the glamour of it all, if that's what it was. In 1986, after failing to win re-election, that is, I guess, to the United States Soccer Federation. He won election in 1984, failed to win re-election in 1986, though he was close enough friends with Pele or Pele, I guess I should say, in order to win. I guess he wasn't that capable of administrator, but that wasn't enough to stop him. He co-founded the American Soccer League, running it from his home. It lasted only 2 years, with Blazer being forced out by the owners who felt they had been kept in the dark about finances, of all things. He became president, though, of the Miami Sharks, taking control of the finances, only to leave it precipitously after 5 months in May of 1989. Now, in 1989, Blazer convinced his friend Jack Warner to run for CONCACAF president. Blazer managed Warner's successful campaign and then was appointed general secretary, which I guess stands to reason after managing the campaign. But who even knew that you would need a campaign manager to win or to run for one of these positions? He was general secretary of CONCACAF from 1990 until 2011. He was a member of the FIFA Executive Committee from 1996 until April of 2013, when Sunil Gulati was elected to replace him. I'm just sort of curious, was Sunil Gulati? He's got an entry here, and I'll see if we can't open that up. I'm just sort of curious whether he was a soccer player himself at any point. I'm curious whether any of the people involved were soccer players. You would think, just because they would have like this love for soccer that would drive you to do whatever it is you have to do in order to, rise into those, the upper ranks. Let's see. He was born in Allahabad, India. His family moved to Connecticut when he was 5 years old, and he grew up playing soccer. Good. At least he grew up playing soccer. I'm glad that at least some of the new FIFA officials are actually familiar with the game. Anyway, the rest of his entry is about his corruption allegations and conviction, which, while interesting, I came here to find out about. How did he get into this? And the answer is, in America, if you liked soccer in the 1970s, the door was wide open for you. So, good for him, building himself a career out of something fun. And at least in the early years, it looked like he was a capable enough administrator to expand international competition opportunities for the men's team. Although, again, how you jump from my son plays soccer to I'm on the governing board of FIFA in how long? I mean, there was a considerable amount of time involved there. But his son started playing in 1976, and he got onto the Eastern New York State Soccer Association, but somewhere between 1976 and 1984, less than 10 years from my son started playing soccer in Westchester County to I won a seat on the United States Soccer Federation because I convinced Pele to campaign for me. Then by 1986, he's out, but by 1989, he's back, having met Jack Warner, and convinces him to run for president of CONCACAF, and he ends up as general secretary. My son started playing soccer in 1976. By 1986, I was in and out of the U.S. Soccer Federation. 3 years later, 13 years from my son wants to be on the soccer team to I am general secretary of CONCACAF. That seems like a meteoric rise for somebody who never played soccer. I'm sure there was no corruption involved anywhere along the line. It was all trumped up charges. I just find that interesting. Maybe you do too. Now we'll switch over to audio that I grabbed from my June 4th, 2015 show, also on the FIFA corruption story. Not the very first day that we touched on it, but the bulk of the story, the most interesting parts of it anyway. There was a little bit in the June 3rd and the June 5th podcast. Maybe later on we'll grab some of those. The tape you are about to hear all the way through to the end of the show, by the way. I might as well remind you because we did the outro music underneath. We went all the way to the end of the show. And so I guess we were promoting what was going on in the after show that day. That show, of course, will not air. Maybe I can remind you at the end of the program. We'll see what we can do. That you should be staying tuned for Justice Putnam's show, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. What's on it today, I have no idea, but I can assure you, as always, it will be interesting. Now, though, the audio from our first look pretty much at the FIFA corruption from back in June 2015. How a curmudgeonly old reporter exposed the FIFA scandal that toppled Sepp Blatter. That name is just killing me. I can't believe it. This Michael E. Miller's piece in the Washington Post. And I saw something else, too, that I think might also reveal something about the level of corruption. Maybe we'll get a chance to include that, too. The biggest news story of the year was breaking, but the journalist responsible was fast asleep. This is a little bit more of a look at the reporter behind exposing all of this, but I think this is a good, interesting roundabout way into the story. If you've already heard about the corruption in general or the story in general, then I won't be informing you much by giving you background at this late date. But this is still interesting. It was just after dawn on May 27th when Andrew Jennings's phone began ringing. Swiss police had just launched a startling raid on a luxury hotel in Zurich, arresting 7 top FIFA officials and charging them and others with running a $150 million racket. The world was stunned. I don't know. The waking world, that is. If Jennings had bothered to climb out of bed, this doesn't make him sound very good, but he's curmudgeonly and old, so that it's endearing in the end. If he had bothered to climb out of bed, he wouldn't have been surprised at the news. After all, he was the man who set the investigation in motion. With a book in 2006 titled Foul, The Secret World of FIFA, Bribes, Vote Rigging, and Ticket Scandals. Bribes sounds bad. Vote rigging sounds bad, but again, it's FIFA voting. It's soccer voting. Are we worried about that thing? Ticket scandals sounds like the least interesting of all. But there's, as we said, more to it. I mean, the voting and bribing results in putting an event someplace that moves lots of money into the hands of very few people. And in order to choose which people are going to get it, I don't know, that should either be a matter of luck or a matter of merit, but instead it's a matter of who can come up with the most bribes. So that's problematic. So it's not just the corruption, that the fact that there's corruption in and around a game that we all enjoy is annoying enough, but it's not, doesn't rise to the level necessarily of international organized crime. But when it's all about, if you give me $1 million, I will take $1 billion from all of these other people and send you 50 million of it. Anyway, so that was his first book. It was followed by an expose aired on the BBC's Panorama program that same year, and then another book in 2014 called Omerta, Sepp Blatter's FIFA Organized Crime Family. That makes it sound a little bit more serious. Does the corruption stand up to that? Let's find out. First, we got to find out about Jennings and his morning routine. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m, Jennings said Tuesday from his farm in the hilly north of England. I turned it off, actually, to get some more sleep, because whatever is happening at 6 a.m. is still going to be there at lunchtime, isn't it? He's not an internet journalist. If you can't tell already, Jennings is an advocate of slow, methodical journalism. For half a century, the 71-year-old investigative reporter has been digging into complex, time-consuming stories about organized crime. That's where he started. And he's still there. In the 1980s, it was bad cops. Hey, remember them? That was an interesting thing. Bad cops. I wonder if we have a problem about that now. The Thai heroin trade. That sounds pretty corrupt. And the Italian mob, which is kind of the definition of organized crime / corruption. In the 1990s, he turned to sports, exposing corruption with the International Olympic Committee. And I wondered when I read this at first, like, gosh, that's awfully dangerous, investigating bad cops, the heroin trade, and the Italian mob. Like, and you do it in that order. Who's going to protect you if the Thai heroin traders and the Italian mob get mad at you? Who's going to protect you? The cops? They were the first ones you exposed. That's some dangerous stuff. And I wondered, did that make him decide at some point, I'm going to switch over to investigating sports? That is corruption, but it's this sort of sweet and interesting corruption, plus it's sports, and nobody's going to get too mad, and maybe it's not as corrupt as the Italian mob, and they might not kill me, but it's still corruption, so I'm still a corruption fighter and a muckraker, but I get to go to sporting events maybe, too? I don't know. Anyway, it turns out he didn't really get himself out of the world of international organized crime at all. For the past 15 years, Jennings has focused on the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, or FIFA, international soccer's governing body. As other journalists were ball-watching, reporting score lines or writing player profiles, Jennings was digging into the dirty deals underpinning the world's most popular game. Credit in this saga should go to the dogged obsession of a single reporter, Andrew Jennings, The Guardian's Simon Jenkins wrote last week, citing in particular Jennings's BBC Panorama film called, what? It's called this, The Beautiful Bung. I don't want to know what that might mean. I guess that means something different in England. The Beautiful Bung, Corruption and the World Cup. I'll just let that one lie for a minute. Now, after decades of threats, suspicions about tapped phone lines and intermittent paychecks, not tapped intermittent paychecks, but just the fact that they're intermittent, that's problematic. Talk to me about that when we talk about recurrency.us next time. Jennings is being vindicated with every twist and turn of the FIFA scandal. Interesting line that. By the way, totally unrelated storyline. Also developing along the being vindicated with every twist and turn, Edward Snowden and Glenn Greenwald. I know that's going to annoy some of you, but I see that storyline finally coming around to sort of like the U.S. Attorney's scandal trajectory, where we come around to saying, okay, there really was a story there, and it was important to reveal. I'm still angry, but whatever. I was never angry, but some of you were. Anyway, back to the beautiful bung, I guess. Interesting, too, another side note I would put out there. Like the poaching story and Ted Poe's problem of saying, well, we need to have, laws with teeth on this thing. You got turf battles, both those that get fought by people protecting their own turf, and I want responsibility for this. No, I want responsibility for this. No, I want the funding for this. No, I want the funding for this. There's also the battle on the other side from the fiscal conservative side, which says neither of you should have responsibility or budget for this because it's stupid to spend money on dumb stuff like this, because I just want to look at one aspect of it. And you're studying fish reproduction. That's fish sex. I'm not having you study fish sex. Well, actually, we're studying, sustainability of salmon stock, which is an important area of commerce. Money. You know what I mean? Oh, money. Yeah, I like money. Okay. I hate salmon. I hate sex and salmon, but I love money, so I'm willing to, to go along with that one. Or volcanoes, or what have you, right? Here we have people saying, I want to stop international poaching, and I want to spend $1 billion on it. What? Who cares? I mean, look, I like rhinos as much as the next guy, but look, I have pictures, and they're in zoos, and I don't really care whether there's wild rhinos around. Well, I don't really necessarily care whether there are rhinos around either. I mean, I do. But I could say, for the sake of, we'll draw that circle of inclusion around me and you. I don't care about rhinos either. What I do care about is international terrorism. And if you sit down and look at this for 2 seconds, I can explain to you the connection between the two. People are killing rhinos so that they can get the horns, so they can sell them in Asia and get lots and lots of money, and then they'll use it for terrorism. You don't like terrorism, do you? No, God, no. You can't accuse me of being on the same. I'm not a terrorist lover like you. Okay. Well, I'll ignore that last part of the remark and say we're on the same page here. This funds terrorism, and that's why I want to stop it. Oh, okay. Well, then that's cool. But again, the turf battle that goes on here. Are you a conservation officer or are you an international counter-terrorism operator? I don't know. A little bit of both, right? Andrew Jennings, are you a sports reporter or are you a B-section sports reporter who happens to be digging into substantive stories about the governance of sports? Should you be in the sports section? Or should you be in the A section or hard news? Who's your editor here? Your stories are about soccer, but really they're about political corruption and bribery. Where should I put your stories? I don't know. Or, yes, they are A section stories, but how often should I run them and at what length and in what depth? It is corruption, but after all, it is only about soccer, and soccer is still a sport and a game, so maybe we put it towards the back of the A section, not on the front page. Well, finally, I guess arresting, 7 top FIFA officials and alleging the kind of corruption that gets alleged at last finally makes it front page news. But I suspect that the corruption lasted as long as it did because of this weird turf issue of where should we put news about corruption in the governing body of a game. And it isn't until it, is provable to have reached the highest levels and in the worst ways that it's worthy of A1 coverage. But just to make a little cycle out of it for you, I suspect that it's likely that the corruption gets to that level precisely because those perpetrating it know that there's very little chance that internationally news editors the world over can be convinced to put that on A1. And so I might as well steal even more, because even if they find out I'm stealing, they'll say, yeah, he's stealing, but it's just about soccer. It's not a big deal. Yeah, he's killing rhinos, but we like rhinos, but it's not a big deal. It's all about, we can make funny jokes about Asian men wanting them for their penises. That's hilarious, right? Well, yeah, but we know why they're buying them. That's funny and all, but who's selling them? Oh, yeah, that is an issue, isn't it? Oh, crap. I'm sorry I missed this. Anyway, back to the story about Andrew Jennings, who recognizes the nexus between these things. During a phone interview Tuesday morning with the Washington Post, Jennings called FIFA president Sepp Blatter a dead man walking. 2 hours later, Blatter announced he was stepping down just days after being reelected. Remember that? I know, said Jennings, I know they are criminal scum. Now, wait a minute, come on, they're just soccer guys. What does he really mean here? He says, I've known it for years, and that is a thoughtful summation. That's not an insult. That is not throwing about wild words. Really? Now you got me intrigued. Let's talk. These scum, he says, have stolen the people's sport. Now, at that point, I said, oh, hyperbole. The people's, they stole the sport. Boo-hoo. You better tell me something else here. They've stolen it, the cynical, thieving bastards, he said. So, yes, it's nice to see fear on their faces. All right, now I'm really questioning things. I can't tell whether this guy's just mad because it's about soccer or are they really corrupt criminal scum. It made me want to read on, so let's do that. Next section of the article is subtitled, A Document Hound. The best way for Americans to imagine Andrew Jennings is to roll Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein together, then add a touch of a Scottish burr and plenty of flannel. All right. Jennings was born in Scotland but moved to London as a child. His grandfather played for a prominent London soccer team, Clapton Orient, now called Leyton Orient. But Jennings had little interest in the sport. He did, however, have a nose for journalism, which is great, but you're really going to need a hand in order to write. But still, it's nice to have a nose for one, too. After finishing school, I'm reading that as not being after finishing school, like he didn't go to finishing school. After he finished school, Jennings joined the Sunday Times of London, where he got a taste of investigative journalism through his nose, apparently. It is possible. He went to work for the BBC, but when the network wouldn't air his documentary on corruption within Scotland Yard, right out of the box, he quit and joined a rival program called World in Action. He turned his police investigation into his first book, Scotland Yard's Cocaine Connection, and a documentary. By the way, this is the sort of book and the sort of accusation that was floated frequently back in the day, but usually dismissed as wild-eyed conspiracy theory, and then floated around there and then occasionally got picked up by other investigative journalists who later turned up dead, and then the world turned away from that again, and then 20 years later you're like, hey, I'm finding the same story again. I wonder if that guy who got killed was really not talking out of his ass. I wonder about that. I got another story packed away for discussion that might head in that direction, but not today. So on we go. I'm a document hound, he said. If I've got your documents, that doesn't prove anything. If I've got them, he says, I know all about you, he said. This journalism business is easy, you know. You just have to find some disgraceful, disgustingly corrupt people, and you work on it. You have to. That's what we do. The rest of the media gets far too cozy with them. It's wrong. Your mother told you what was wrong. You know what's wrong. Our job is to investigate, acquire evidence. Okay, he is curmudgeonly, isn't he? That is essentially Jennings' mantra. Take time, dig up dirt, and don't trust those in power. He applied the same logic to international drug smuggling rings and Italian mafiosi. Then, sports. And that's the transition that, you might be wondering about. After the Scotland Yard expose, a colleague at World in Action named Paul Greengrass, who later became a Hollywood filmmaker, directing several Jason Bourne films as well as the recent blockbuster Captain Phillips, suggested investigating the IOC. That is Jennings, said, "What's that?" Jennings remembers. Soon, however, the clueless sports fan would become steeped in the inner workings of the International Olympic Committee. When I looked into the IOC, I discovered that the president, Juan Antonio Samaranch, who was universally sucked up to by the sports press, was a Franco-fascist. Hey, how do you like that? I remember Juan Antonio Samaranch. He was IOC president, I think, at least during the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. He's like the one name I remember about that. And I always wondered, how do you become the head of the International Olympic Committee anyway? I seem to live a pretty posh lifestyle. Can I get into that? Well, I guess being a Franco-fascist is a good way to start. Anyway, he thought the wrong side won World War II. That's Samaranch. Samaranch admitted, by the way, to serving as Spanish dictator Francisco Franco's sports minister, but claimed he was not a fascist at heart. I just was doing it for the love of sport, and hey, I lived in a fascist system. Not my fault. Besides, just sports, right? Yeah, how do you regard that? The sports minister for a fascist administration. What would we do if we caught the sports minister for the Saddam Hussein regime? The sports minister. Would we say, it's just sports. I mean, let's let the guy go. Or would we say, what does it take to become sports minister in Saddam Hussein's regime? I mean, I assume there's a lot of sports fans, many of whom are non-corrupt or wouldn't gas their own people, let's say, or wouldn't help hide, weapons of mass destruction if any were available. But, of all the people up for the sports minister job, I guess if you have your pick, you choose the one who's kind of into Saddam Hussein, right? Anyway, Jennings wrote a trilogy of books about a series of alleged boondoggles, bribes, and drug controversies that culminated in a scandal surrounding the 2002 Winter Olympics in, Salt Lake City, the Mitt Romney Olympics, my goodness, where dozens of IOC members were expelled or sanctioned for wrongdoing. Not Mitt Romney, I guess. He said that most sports reporters wouldn't touch these subjects for fear of losing access to top officials and athletes, or because it simply took too much time and effort. And that's really interesting. Again, here's a turf issue, right? A major actual piece of criminal news could have been broken, but the people who would first get wind of it were sports reporters. They feared that if they pursued the crime story, which isn't their beat anyway, they'd lose access that they need to do their sports writing, access to officials and athletes. Now, why they aren't able to interest people in the newsroom, the main part of the newsroom, hey, there's a crime story over here and you should pursue it because what do you care if you don't get access to athletes? That seems like a pretty good cooperation, a good cooperative effort to me, but I guess it never happened in most cases. You needed a crossover guy like this. Anyway, he said that most sports reporters wouldn't touch this stuff because of the access issue. When Samaranch stepped down in 2001, Jennings decided to shift his focus. By then, I was aware that there was something very, very stinky, as he puts it, at FIFA, he said. So, next section, looking for a fight with FIFA, says, from prior investigations and studying organized crime, Jennings knew he would need sources to crack open the secretive soccer association. You know that everywhere, any organization, if there is any sign at all of how corrupt the people at the top are, there's decent people down in the middle management. Because they've got mortgages. They've got children to put through school, Jennings said. They are just employees, and they will have a sense of proper morality. It never seems to exist, that sense of morality up at the top where all that cash is. Isn't that weird? So you've got to help them to slip you the stuff out the back door. It used to be from the filing cabinet. Now it's from the server. So at least he's aware of, online life. So the Scotsman decided to ambush one of Blatter's first news conferences after being reelected in 2002. I went to the press conferences there in their Zurich's headquarters, he said. Sloping all up the walls on either side was the employees, the robots, all in their FIFA blazers with robotic faces. Nothing to say, just lining the walls. So I said, right, they're the ones I want. Interesting. I've got to get the message to them that I'm here. I'll cross the road for a fight. I want it. I'm looking for it. If Blatter's downfall can be traced to a single moment, it is probably the one that came next. You won't believe what happens next. Click here. When the FIFA president finished his speech, Jennings grabbed the microphone and blurted out a deliberately outrageous question. Interesting. I'm surrounded by all these terribly posh reporters in suits and silk ties and buttoned-up shirts, for God's sake, he remembered. And here's me in some hiking gear. I get the mic, and I said, Herr Blatter, have you ever taken a bribe? That's not even all that crazy a question, is it? Talk about crashing the party, though. Jennings recalled Tuesday, reporters are moving away from me as if I've just let out the biggest smell since bad food. That's an interesting way of saying things. Well, that's what I wanted. Thank you, idiot reporters. The radar dish on top of my head is spinning around to all these blazers against the wall, saying, here I am your boy. I'm not impressed by these tossers. I know what they are. I've done it to the IOC, and I'll do it to them. The outcome was doubly golden. Blatter denied ever taking a bribe, which gave Jennings a great headline, but he also got the goods. 6 weeks later, I'm in the dark at about midnight, down where the river in Zurich widens out into the lake, standing by a very impressive-looking 19th century office block, wondering why I've been asked to go there by somebody I don't know, when the door opens and I'm dragged in, Jennings recalls. I'm taken into a very posh set of offices. And within half an hour, a senior FIFA official arrived carrying a wonderful armful of documents. And it ran from there. And it still does. Those documents outline the incredible opulence of FIFA's executive committee. Chief among them, Blatter. So far all we have is, well, they're paying themselves a lot of money. That stinks, but is it criminal? Let's look. Jennings reported that Blatter had been paying himself a secret six-figure bonus. Why? In Herr Blatter's case, he doesn't know what a scheduled flight is. He has no idea. He hasn't taken one for about 40 years. He always has to buy a private jet out of Zurich. Even if he was going shopping at the local mall, he'd probably hire one, Jennings said. He's got to be given constant evidence that he's a powerful, important person. So the big Mercedes taking him to the private jet engine at the Zurich airport is what sustains him. Okay, I'm familiar with that. Not from a personal perspective. I'm familiar with the kind of person, right? Blatter threatened to sue Jennings for defamation, but didn't. Jennings kept digging into the president and his fellow FIFA executives. At times he suspected that his phone had been tapped, his computer hacked. I don't know whether that's the kind of reach that FIFA has, but I could imagine it, right? I could imagine somebody in FIFA knows somebody in the local police force. And, could I get a wiretap on this guy? No, we don't do that kind of stuff. Well, FIFA does have something that, some of these lower level cops might be very well interested in getting in exchange. Well, look, no one has to know. No one will be any the wiser. We'll do this tap in exchange for the most awesome set of tickets you ever saw. They're going to give us a box at the World Cup finals. I mean, you could bribe almost anyone in 3/4 of the world to do almost anything with stuff like that, I would think. That's a huge thing to be able to give away. So maybe they have more leverage than you think. Not because they deal in the frivolous, but because everybody's interested in this frivolous thing that they deal with. That's worth a lot. All right. Back to the story. In 2006, he published his first book on the organization. Remember that one, Foul, The Secret World of FIFA, Bribes, Vote Rigging, and Ticket Scandals. Now Ticket Scandals begins to take on some serious weight, which accused Blatter and other top soccer executives of accepting bribes. The officials didn't just deny it. Sometimes they physically defended themselves. Jack Warner, which Jack Warner is this? Jack Warner punched me, spat at me on camera, Jennings said. These guys come out to the car park and suddenly there's me, terrible and old and gray and lined, and saying, excuse me, did you take your bribes through this or that company? And they go all rigid. Well, let's see. And it's not the Jack Warner we're thinking of, I don't think, by the way. There's a lot of Jack Warners out there. Anyway, that same year, he aired more allegations against FIFA on Panorama, the BBC documentary program, and then still more in 2010 on the same current affairs show. Now, leveling the playing field. This is an awfully long article, too, but let's get through as much of it as we can. Foul earned Jennings a following, including admirers within law enforcement. In 2009, he got a call from an ex-spook, as he puts it, who wanted to introduce Jennings to a few people. I go down to London to this anonymous office block, and you go in, and there are 3 men with American accents, Jennings remembers. They've got government-style haircuts. Oh, you Americans. They introduce themselves as FBI special agents and give me their business cards, which say Organized Crime Squad. bliss, Jennings remembered thinking. The European police forces will do nothing about FIFA, so it was damn good to see professional investigators get involved. You gotta turn to Americans who don't particularly love soccer, right? Again, among the quarter of the world, maybe possibly not bribable with fantastic seats to FIFA events, would be the FBI. They could give a crap about soccer. So finally, America's disdain for soccer pays off. For soccer. How do you like that? Jennings was eager to get help, and after making a few phone calls to sources in the Americas, he sent confidential Confederation of North Central America and Caribbean Association Football, or the most ridiculous-looking acronym I've ever seen, CONCACAF, C-O-N-C-A-C-A-F. Well, he got their financial reports to the FBI and the IRS. They showed mysterious multi-million-dollar commissions, Jennings claimed. I said, right, let's just level the playing field a bit, he said, and I gave them the documents that really got this thing going. Jennings trusted the FBI rather than his fellow reporters. How do you like that? Trust the government rather than our free press. To look at an organization like FIFA and know what crooks they are, he said. For 6 years, he has used his sources to stay abreast of the investigation. Jennings said he knew that a grand jury had met in the past year to consider bringing charges, but he didn't know who would be charged or when. The answer came while Jennings was sleeping that morning on May 27th. Swiss officials arrived in force to the 5-star Bauer Olach Hotel in Zurich, where FIFA's top officials were meeting ahead of an election to determine if Blatter would remain president. Interesting, a closed-door meeting to determine whether or not the election of the president is going to go forward as planned. But I guess you can get away with that because it's just soccer and it's private after all. In a matter of minutes, 7 current FIFA executives, including its vice president and then the Central American, North American, CONCACAF, whatever, chief Jeffrey Webb, were arrested and charged with racketeering, bribery, money laundering, and fraud. 7 other men, including FIFA's number 2, Jack Warner, were also indicted in a Brooklyn federal court. Isn't it wonderful? Jennings said. You're in one of the world's most luxurious hotels with all expenses paid, drinking champagne on Tuesday night, and you're sleeping it off at 6 o'clock on Wednesday morning when there's a knock, 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 and a police officer asks, "Will you put your clothes on, sir?" They are never going to be in a luxury hotel again, he said. They're going to be in detention in Switzerland, which might not be as bad as it is in other places, but okay. They will lose their extradition cases because I'm sure the Department of Justice will put on a good case. The Swiss will have to let them go to America. Will they bail them in America? They're all flight risks. They're all foreigners. The first chance they get, they'll be over the border and gone. So I think they're going to find out just how interesting Rikers Island can be. That may be wishful thinking, but there you have it. Jennings makes no effort to hide his happiness over the fact that the men he has been investigating for 15 years have finally been arrested. It's been a very happy week since they got that knock on the door, he admitted. It's nice to know that Herr Blatter won't be able to sleep tonight, and that he'll finally get to sleep around 5:30. And at 6 o'clock, someone will slam a car door outside, and he'll be shooting out of bed and under the bed. Serves him right. He's not a nice man. Shortly after Jennings spoke to the Washington Post, Sepp Blatter, just 4 days after being reelected, announced that he would be stepping down as the president of FIFA. He is relieved. Sepp Blatter is. I had to just throw that one in there. A special election will be called later this year, and you know how those go, because you're political. It is my deep care for FIFA and its interests, which I hold very dear, that has led me to take this decision, said Blatter, who has denied wrongdoing and has not been charged with the crime. While I have a mandate from the membership of FIFA, I do not feel that I have a mandate from the entire world of football. The fans, the players, the clubs, the people who live, breathe, and love football as much as we all do at FIFA, and who love it so much that they pay lots of money for tickets, which is how come there's a pool around for me to skim off of. As for the reporter behind the biggest sports scandal of the century, Jennings said he can retire soon, knowing that his investigations led to real change. Then I can do my garden up here in the hills and play with my lovely children, probably grandchildren at this point, he said, staring out his window at the English countryside. I've had satellite trucks blocking the quarter-mile drive up to my farm here in the hills since the scandal broke, the freelance journalist said. It's great fun. After years of being barred from FIFA news conferences, Jennings said he's looking forward to seeing the indicted executives in a U.S. court. I just hope I can afford the airfare to New York and that somebody will let me sleep on their couch, he said, so that I can be there in the courthouse press box to say, hi guys, it's been a long run, hasn't it? Pretty funny. So, what exactly were they up to that makes it so serious? Because right now it's a great revenge story, but there's just not that much there about how disgusting the FIFA guys really are. So, if you need something disgusting, let's turn to Vice.com and see if we can't find out something really gross about these guys that'll make you happier for Jennings in case you're not. How soccer despot Sepp Blatter finally fell to earth by Ben Machell. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Machell over at Vice.com. Ready? Yesterday evening, this says, from whenever it was published, when Sepp Blatter announced he'd be resigning as FIFA president, it would not have come as a shock if he had immediately leapt onto a Segway and ridden it into a waiting chopper, the blades of which were already whirring for takeoff. Dr. Evil, I guess. As a story, the 79-year-old's sudden fall after 17 years as the most powerful man in world football is complicated, hubristic, and funny. I honestly wish I could guide you through every twist and turn of the wider ongoing FIFA corruption scandal, which now appears to have put the destinations of the next 2 World Cups in doubt. But I'm not sure I have the forensic mind required. I mean, you would basically need to be a one-man Warren Commission to sift through all that. What I can do, though, is draw out some of the more intriguing aspects of the case as things currently stand. Great, let's do it. This is probably the coolest thing about the entire scandal. The feds, literally the effing FBI, are responsible for conducting the investigation that has ultimately led to Blatter's fall. We, in the inert old world, that is to say Europe, spend years pissing and moaning and rolling our eyes about the fact that FIFA obviously stinks from top to bottom and that Blatter is like one of those Renaissance popes who lived in a solid gold palace full of hot nuns. But in the end, it's the states who actually care enough to do something about it. And you know what's funny is, we don't. But, ironically, that's who you have to go to in order to get somebody who doesn't care about the game enough to prosecute the corruption involved in it and not be bribed. It helps that Blatter looks like a Steven Seagal film baddie. I wouldn't have picked Seagal, but okay. If the Americans love doing one thing, it's taking down baddies. All right. Thank you, but no. It turns out that the U.S. Justice Department, not the entire one, whose crest is literally a pissed-off bald eagle. I love the fact that this is coming from overseas. A pissed-off bald eagle surfing on a bullet painted like the American flag. Has been compiling a case against FIFA for a while. Personally, I like to imagine that when the 7 senior officials were arrested last week, they were grilled by a load of gawky federal agents with Polish surnames, fraternity rings, and coffee in polystyrene cups. During the questioning, the agents would play dumb about the rules of football, scratching their heads, shrugging, and making jokes about how they preferred baseball anyway. This would enrage the FIFA officials so much they'd incriminate themselves by letting vital pieces of information slip before it eventually transpired that the interrogating feds actually effing loved football all along. That's not going to happen. If this were a film, the final shot would be of a jailed FIFA official peering down from his alpine cell to see his FBI interrogators enjoying the game of 5-a-side. The officials is the next section here. One of the least surprising things about the arrests was that what the officials looked like. Seriously, take a good long look. A good 85% of them look like the Sith Lords in the Star Wars prequels. If you don't want people to look at you and think, could this person possibly be part of a shadowy, sinister, super governmental elite? Why not do your absolute best not to look like a corrupted Jedi wearing a $6,000 Italian suit? Here's the guy who gave away all the info. I'd never heard of Chuck Blazer prior to last week, and yet the more I learn about him, the more I regret all those wasted years. He's the former senior FIFA official who reportedly acted as the FBI snitch, and as grotesques go, he's absolutely amazing. Prior to fessing up to the feds, the American had been riding the FIFA gravy train so hard and for so long that he apparently now requires a fleet of mobility scooters to get around on. According to reports, his cats had their own apartment in New York City's Trump Tower. What? And, continuing with the animal theme, he would be scooting around Central Park with a parrot on his shoulder. He has many parrots, as most evil geniuses do. Apparently an ex-wife had trained one of them to insult him. I mean, the guy was so bent, it was kind of brilliant. Not only had he not paid millions in taxes, and this is ultimately what the FBI used as leverage against him. Uh-oh. How about that? Oh, the old Al Capone move. But newspaper investigations have shown that in 2005, he had that crazy Confederation of North Central American and Caribbean Association football spend almost $50,000 on a Hummer for him, plus an additional $21,000 in private Manhattan parking fees. Who the F needs a Hummer in Manhattan? I'll tell you who. Chuck effing Blazer. That's the tenor of the Vice piece. We're probably not going to get through all of that, but that should give you a taste of what kind of corruption we're really talking about in terms of the end users. And this isn't the top guy. But remember that a lot of this is tied into where these events are being held. And since I think one of the near future World Cups, well, let's see, the next two I think are scheduled for Qatar, where I don't know about the infrastructure out there or really the ease of access there, but another in Russia. Yeah, Russia. Not really, you know, I mean, did we not learn our lesson from the Olympics thing in Russia? And goodness, if there's any does anybody have any indication that maybe oligarchs and organized crime figures might be skimming off the top of this thing? Why were we locating the thing in Russia? I mean, Russians play soccer. Don't get me wrong. And it's a European, and, you know, you can actually get to it easier than Qatar, I'm sure. But, you know, the millions, the billions of dollars that this thing is going to generate are going to go into the hands of you-know-who. So, yes, there's a connection to organized crime. And, yes, that money is getting kicked back. And, yes, the harmless decision to put a soccer game or 2 or 20 or 60 or however many go on in a World Cup in one place versus another. Does it really matter? Well, there's a lot of money changes hands. And when a lot of money changes hands, some weird things happen, including, I would guess, during the competition for who's going to be able to leverage that money and skim what, probably some people, getting killed along the way. Can you lay that at the feet of Sepp Blatter? Probably not. But the FBI has some leverage into this, and the IRS has some leverage into this, because along the way you figure, if I'm going to be dealing with oligarchs and organized crime and people killing people, what's the point really in paying taxes on all this crap anyway, especially if I think, no one's really going to give a crap anyway. Who's going to investigate the soccer governing body in the United States? Nobody. Sounds like a great racket. Anyway, take a look at the Vice article. Maybe I'll skim it. Maybe we'll continue with it tomorrow because, it's pretty funny in the way it's written. And it'll give us a taste of exactly how bad these guys really were. And once again, remind us that even simplistic, stupid stuff like that, when it involves a giant pile of money, and the stupider things are these days, the more giant the pile of money often is, you're going to find some serious crime if you dig enough. I guess that guy was entirely right about that. Anyway, stay tuned for more investigative reporting of the sort like we do here on the After Show with Wink and Justice. We'll be borrowing other people's investigative reporting and musing over it. What in particular? The U.S. military admits that there were more mistaken anthrax shipments than previously reported. Why are we shipping it anywhere, by the way? Nevada ranchers defy the Interior Department, again, and the Bureau of Land Management by grazing cattle on parched, federally managed lands. Oh no, I wonder what we can do about that. Maybe nothing. And WikiLeaks offers a $100,000 bounty for a copy of the entire Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now that's a sideline for you. On the last half today, finance news and modern monetary theory, Bureau Chief Arliss Bunny, you know her as the author of the Smart Bunny's Guide to Debt, Deficit, and Austerity.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thank you for listening, and remember that all of the aforementioned, plus the Connect, Unite, Act, Daily Kos Community Calendar, and more is coming up on the After Show with Wink and Justice. And hey, by the way, special thanks to Arliss Bunny, a generous supporter of our campaign over at recurrency.us. Thanks again, Arliss. Talk to you tomorrow.